Hello, this is Dr. Benoit, and we are going to jump into theories in people in Education 689, Creative Thinking and Problem Solving. Again, please forgive me for keeping my screen like this, but it's how I can see the notes that I have below so that I don't miss anything with our lecture today. And also, I want to remind you that the slide deck is going to be linked on Moodle, so you're welcome to pull it up and follow along on your own. And I also have videos embedded within the slide decks. Of course, you can't access them here via this particular video lecture, but you'll be able to access those within the slide deck itself that's going to be on Moodle. So just check those out. So I'm great. I'm excited. This is going to be such a great lesson. I think you're going to enjoy it. It is so interesting to me, the theories of creative thinking and how they are interrelated with what we know about giftedness and how it manifests itself. And also, you're going to see a lot of similarities with the characteristics of creativity and what we know are the characteristics of gifted individuals. So let's go ahead and jump in. And we want to consider creativity characteristics. So this is where I'd like for you to start. So I want you to consider what sets creative people apart from others. What is it about them that stands out, that's a distinguishing factor of creativity? What personality traits and learning habits are characteristic of creative people? What does it look like when they're in their creative process? How do culture, society, and personal history affect the development of one's creativity? And so, what are some things that promote creativity in individuals? And what are some factors that perhaps are hindrances to the creative development of individuals? And how does creativity manifest in an academically gifted student? And so as we move throughout the course, we are talking about creativity in general, but of course, we're going to consistently be grounding it in what we know about gifted students. So let's go ahead and set our learning purpose and objectives. We want to examine theories and areas of study that are prominent in creativity today. We want to analyze how context and social forces shape creativity. We want to identify and discuss characteristics associated with creative people. And then we have actually two major assessment focus prompts that we are looking at today. And so if you'll remember, those major assessment focus prompts are going to be present. You're going to see them in every discussion board, and you're going to see them in your final project, the creativity project. So every single week, you are sort of building your knowledge and building your bank of work that is going to be able to be used in the creativity project. So the major assessment focus prompt number 2 is explain 3 theories of creativity, at least three. And then the major assessment focus prompt 3 is apply characteristics associated with creativity to a creative individual. And so we have our outcomes here. The graduate student knows and can articulate 2 or more theories of creativity, and the graduate student knows and can apply characteristics associated with creativity to a creative individual. So I just snipped this directly from our syllabus, and it shows you how it's aligned with our standards. So let's go ahead and jump into accomplishing these objectives. So let's talk about theories today. Last week, we talked about some of the early models, and this week's focus is going to be about what theories today. And when we say today, it's kind of relative. How can I say this? The older I get, the more time is playing tricks with me about what is recent and what is current. So we're going to be using what our textbook has established for that. So early theories talked about personality and affective variables. And even in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's kind of where we're going at here. We were beginning to get some idea of studies and research about creativity. There was more of a focus on it. And at that point, researchers were really interested in the personality traits and the affective variables of creative individuals. So these, those things that could be observed about the people themselves. And then we got into cognitive theories. These are psychological processes of creative behavior. So this is truly are the cognition processes, the thinking, the metacognition even associated with creative behavior. Social cultural theories deal with the context or environment of creativity. And so they do focus on the individual, but they never focus on the individual without looking at the situation that the individual is in and the influences that the individual is affected by. And so that's kind of what makes it a little bit different than those early theories. The early theories were purely focused on the individual. And then lastly, and the newest wave of research is neurobiological theories, the brain areas and process that produce creativity. I should say processes here, and the processes that produce creativity. That's what neurobiological theories are concerned with. So it's important that we consider, we're going to study each one of these. We're going to look at all four of them, but it's very important that we consider how these theories interact to shape systems theories of creativity. So that's what's really, really important, because we know that nothing is created in a vacuum, so to speak. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. So Csikszentmihalyi's systems view of creativity saw creativity not as a characteristic of particular people or products, but as an interaction among person, domain, and field. And so that's what this is kind of a blurry image here. It's clearer in your textbook, but I appreciated the color coding of this one. It really kind of helped you distinguish and see the differences. And I also appreciate some of the verbiage that's used here. So essentially, this particular view says that the person produces some variation in the information gained from the culture in which he or she lives. This variation may result from cognitive flexibility, motivation, or an unusual and inspiring life experience. However, according to Csikszentmihalyi, examining the mechanisms of novelty in the individual is only part of the picture. Individuals are not creative in a vacuum. And so I'm going to kind of restate that from before. They create in a domain. So if you look at the very top of our triangle, that's that cultural system. And a domain is the knowledge, the tools, the values, and the practices. So the knowledge, tools, values, and practices of that cultural system. A playwright creates in a symbol system. I'm going to use this example. I'm stealing this from the book. The playwright creates in a symbol system and tradition of a culture. Without knowledge concerning the conventions of theater and script writing, it would be impossible, or at least very difficult, to be a successful creative playwright. Creativity demands a domain-specific knowledge base. So that's what this is talking about, domain-specific. A creative mathematician must know mathematics. A biologist must know biology. A carver must be able to carve. The field, so this is that lower left portion of the triangle in the peachy orange color. The field is the community of practice. These can sometimes be the gatekeepers of the field, so to speak, and this is the social system. And so I want you to see how these are working together. evaluates innovation, and retains selected ones. So this social system of the field evaluates the effectiveness of the creator in producing work in a particular domain. So we'll go back to our example of the playwright. So the field is comprised of people who can affect the structure of the domain. Continuing the example of theater, for example, the field of theater is made up of theater teachers, drama critics, audience members, producers, actors, directors, and any other individuals who help shape the definition of good theater at a particular time in a particular society. To be perceived as creative, the playwright must strike a balance with the order of the field. If the play is too similar to past standards, it will be considered mundane. If it is too different, it will not be considered art. If the variation is accepted, it becomes part of the domain to be transmitted by the field to novices. In some domains, notably the arts, it is possible for individuals to create works that are not accepted by the field at the time they are created. This rejection may mean poverty for the creator, but in time, possible posthumously. So I want you to be thinking like a, Van Gogh. Acceptance may come. And it's actually really sad when that happens, that they're not appreciated during their lifetimes, but it does happen. Even in the seemingly objective domains such as science, the sciences, there is a structure to the field that influences the possibilities for high-level creative accomplishments. It is difficult to become influential without the ability to for publishing in the right journals or to be accepted by the right conferences. Additionally, individuals are not only judged by the field, but they are also formed by it. They are influenced by the creativity of others in their field. And so that's kind of how this triangle works. When we consider how this system has meaning in our educational context, it's important for us to consider the field in which our students are demonstrating their creativity. Does our education system value the type of creativity all our students bring? Are all our students being given high quality knowledge and skill in the domain that supports their creativity? So they have these individual characteristics, their genetic makeup, their talents, their life experience, their cultural experiences. And those things are, to a certain degree, relatively fixed. But as educators, we can influence the domain. We can ensure that we're giving high quality education to all of our students. Specifically, when we think about gifted students, we're thinking about those gifted students having access to the latest learning materials, the most effective learning strategies, access and opportunities to be able to participate in all sorts of not just learning disciplines and domains, but even extracurricular type of activities that would enhance their understanding cross-culturally and cross-curricular. And then next, we want to consider the field. So for example, many times our schools may not have a platform or an outlet or a channel for our students to express their creativity, particularly when we're thinking of some of our smaller schools or some schools that have limited funding, limited resources. That can really be an issue. So we want to consider that and keep that in mind as gifted teachers. Next, we're going to switch over to one that should be very familiar to you. And if you don't know it by now, I promise you, by the time you get finished with your gifted courses, you definitely will. Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences is one which is very popular, not just in gifted education, but just in education in general. And he talks about this particular assertion is one in which he theorizes that There are different types of what we call smart, being smart. There's the visual spatial smart, the musical smart, and so on. So part of, or a derivation, so to speak, of this theory was these 5 activities that he observed that through his studies with the multiple intelligences, he was able to describe 5 types of activities that creative individuals are involved in. So the first is solving a particular problem. This includes primarily scientific or mathematical research questions, but also covers tightly constrained artistic tasks, such as musical arrangements, original compositions, and things like that. Putting forth a general conceptual scheme. This includes the development of artistic or scientific theories, for example, the theory of relativity or the characteristics of cubism. The third one is creating a product. Creative products include works of art, literature, and choreography. Giving a stylized performance. Stylized performances are defined generally by a script or score, but they can include opportunities for interpretation, improvisation, or innovation. Examples are dance, drama, and musical performances. And performing for high stakes. Gardner described this as a type of creative endeavor in which one's words and actions are the substance of creativity, and in which one may, I'm going to add that, and in which one may risk security, health, or life in the service of a mission. This type of creativity is exemplified by public figures such as Gandhi. It's interesting to consider which of the activist strategies we view on the evening news could be considered performing for high stakes. I also want to point here that for adolescents, security could simply mean, drawing attention to oneself in an unusual way, non-conforming in some type of way. It's not always going to be a Gandhi situation or some type of, nightly news situation, especially when we're thinking of adolescence. But when we think about our creative students and our gifted students, we want to consider these 5 activities, and we want to consider when we're giving them authentic learning experiences. Do we give them authentic audiences to perform in front of? Do we give them opportunities to perform for some sort of high stakes type of activity? Are we putting them in touch with things that have, perhaps money or attention or prestige or contests associated with it, so that it gets beyond just teaching them to a test and actually creating some sort of meaning and purpose for their learning? So we want to consider that when we are crafting lessons and creating units and even creating assessments for our students. Next is Sternberg's theories, and there are actually 3 of them here. So we're going to take a little bit of time and go over them. Different people will prefer different types of creative activities, and different types of activities will be demanded or accepted in different contexts. For example, when economies are in turmoil, innovations in energy production may be more accepted than when things are more economically stable. When we believe we are doing well, there can be less motivation for or tolerance of innovations that send us in new directions. Sternberg worked with other researchers to develop 3 theories which address and categorize the ways creatives propel existing ideas forward. So the first one is called the investment model. Creatives pursue ideas that are novel or out of favor, which is considered buying low metaphorically. Then they convince the field of the value of those ideas. Once the ideas gain favor, they allow others to pursue them. That's the selling high feature. And then they go on to other endeavors. So that is the investment model, the buy low, sell high. And in this case, it's the value of ideas. You can see that a lot of our tech gurus, the gurus that we consider today, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Steve Jobs, they definitely use this investment model. Yes, they did it with ideas, but definitely they did it with money as well. But these are the Bill Gates, these types of people. The investment model can be seen in how their creativity manifested itself. Next is the triangular model. This is a model of defiance. And there's three prongs to it. There's the defiance of the crowd, which is the defiance of traditional beliefs or conventional beliefs about the field or the domain even. Defiance of oneself and one's own beliefs. And so this is sort of like the defiance of thinking that something is impossible for someone to do or improbable for someone to do. And the assumptions of the zeitgeist in which the creator is operating. And so this sort of has to do with the moral sometimes, or the ethical, or the acceptable, so to speak. The traditional type beliefs is what this means. And so this triangular model is one of defiance. And sometimes we can see this, it's going to be really obvious, like one prong of it may be really obvious in a creative pursuit, and the other three may be a little bit more subtle. For example, we have lots of examples where someone very unexpected did something highly creative in a field. Maybe they did not have, access to certain types of learning, or they didn't even have access to certain materials or tools. And, they create beauty out of seeming nothingness, or meaning out of nothingness. So there are lots of examples like that. And then there is the third theory, which is the wisdom model. This is a synthesis of intelligence and creativity, and it balances the need for change with dedication to the common good. Underscoring this is the assumption that only when creativity is tempered by wisdom can society's problems be effectively addressed. And so the wisdom model is one that we often hear sort of thrown about in ethical decision making, when we know that we have the innovative capacity to create something. So for example, AI right now is the wisdom model is something I'm hearing a lot in discussions with makers about AI. We've done it, so we've done it now. But is it tempered? How have we tempered this with wisdom? And we could spend all class period talking about that one. So those are Sternberg's theories, these three different theories about creative activities. And it talks about they are concerned more with the factors, the situations that produce creativity. So those are the Sternberg theories. Next is Amabile's 3 components of creativity. So again, you can look in your book. There is a clearer diagram in your book, but I really liked this one. This one is actually drawn from a workplace website, because this is not only used for the classroom creativity, it's used for workplace creativity. And it's just really well done. I really like the color coding on it. And I also really appreciate the verbiage, the explanations of each portion. So let's go ahead and jump in for this model. This model of creativity has been particularly influential in its inclusion of non-cognitive personal characteristics within a broader systems model. So Amabile was concerned with creative situations. What are the circumstances that are conducive to creativity? Some of her most compelling findings were on the aspect of motivation. She identified 3 hallmarks of intrinsic motivation: interest, competence, and self-determination. Self-determination is the sense that we are working on something for our own reasons. not someone else's. This theory has strong parallels to Renzulli's three-ring conception of giftedness, which I'm sure you've heard of by this point. If you haven't, I promise you will. And it's often used in, Renzulli is often used in gifted and talented research. And again, there are a lot of parallels here. And it's also parallels with Bloom's phases of talent development. And so if you're not familiar with that model, look that one up. That one's pretty interesting as well. So let's just take a moment and kind of review these three components of creativity. Within every individual, creativity is a function of three components: expertise, creative thinking skills, and motivation. Can managers, and in this case, teachers, influence these components? The answer is an emphatic yes, for better or for worse, through workplace, we would say classroom, practices and conditions. So let's look at creative thinking skills. These determine how flexibly and imaginatively people approach problems. Do their solutions upend the status quo? Do they persevere through dry spells? Let's go over and look at the green, which is the expertise. In a word, this is knowledge. This is the technical, procedural, the intellectual. So if we consider, I'm just going to go back here for a moment. If we consider this model, this one, it called it the domain. This was the knowledge, the tools, and practices. And this one calls it the expertise. And then lastly, at the bottom, that's the motivation. And that one is really the key to this model. Not all motivation is created equal. An inner passion to solve the problem at hand leads to solutions far more creative than do external rewards, such as money. This component, called intrinsic motivation, is the one that can be most immediately influenced by the work environment or the classroom environment. And so this is very important for us to consider when we think about what we're using to motivate our students. Oftentimes we try to use test scores. We might try to use grades, or even sometimes we'll dangle the carrots of rewards and things like that. And when we do that, I'm not saying that it's necessarily all a bad thing, because I think that many times, especially for our gifted students, it can be a way that they're recognized and that they're acknowledged. But if we spend so much time on those extrinsic rewards that we're not building the capacity for intrinsic motivation and those intrinsic rewards within our students, we're really doing them a disservice and the entire learning process a disservice. This actually leads us to this next one. But before we move along, let me just explain that there is another iteration, a recent iteration of this model. I've read about it, but I actually couldn't find any pictures of it that I really liked. I found one, but it was really primitive, so I didn't use it. But her follow-up research actually has an entire circle around this triad here. And she is looking at the, I think she calls it the environment itself. And so what I'm trying to say is this one is still developing. This theory is still, it's ongoing and it's developing. But it brings us to this one. This is Hennessy's classroom system model. And this is one of the ones where you definitely want to take a little bit of time. I'm not going to do it here and now, but this is actually Hennessy, and she is delivering a TED Talk about her experience and as a researcher and as a teacher. And she makes a really important assertion that's fundamental regarding changes in education. And she is really she expanded on Amabile's model with her own thinking and her own research. So she expanded on it by making it relevant for the specific context of the classroom. So I really want you to take some time. It's 67 through 68 in your textbook. And there is a really great graphic at the bottom of 67 that is the conceptual model for this particular theory. So in addition to the domain expertise, which we talked about already, the task motivation and problem solving, her model accounted for individual differences, which we know that's such an important part of our students. They are definitely not all the same. Their backgrounds are not the same. Their personalities are different. They're just individual little lives that are totally different. So she accounted for individual differences. And then the little c classroom culture and the big C of the larger context influencing the classroom were also additions. So not only did she put it in the context of the little c, which is the classroom, but again, she also said, okay, what is that classroom? What societal norms, values, power distancing, social cognition, and psyche of self? What is that classroom being connected with? How is it being influenced? And so definitely go and check that out, and then definitely check out her speech at Wright, and very important assertion that she makes about changes that as a teacher and a researcher she feels we should make in our classrooms. Next are the neurobiological theories. And again, I put a little video here for you. It's actually a series of 3 different videos. I love them all. You can just watch them one after the other, and it really explains a lot of the new research that is coming to light regarding neurological processes and creativity and how they are related. So what we're discovering. So neurobiological theories ask the question, how do our brains work to allow creative ideas to emerge? It uses technology to scan the brain in operation during various creative activities. Some findings initially, right off the top, are that creativity requires the whole brain. So unlike previous theories that thought, like the whole I'm right brain, I'm left brain, that sort of deal, no, that's definitely not true. Creativity requires the whole brain. You can read more about it, pages 71 through 78 in the book. Of course, different activities make different portions of the brain fire, so to speak. The next finding is that highly creative people have messy minds, and this really gives me hope for myself. And it's really interesting to read about the concept of messy minds. It's just a lot going on there in their minds. And what's so cool about the neurobiology is that the scans allow us to see it. They allow us to see what's happening in the brain, the firing, the different channels and the different networks that are working together in this mess in order for the individual to create. And then the next one, which I think is such an interesting finding considering the messy minds finding, is that reflection is necessary for learning and creating. So the concept of reflection, reflecting on our own learning, reflecting on our feelings, reflecting on what we've gained from an experience, confusion that we've encountered and experienced, it's necessary for the learning and creating process. So please read pages 71 through 78 to learn more about neurobiological theories. Neuroscience research is providing rich insight about how to promote creativity in the classroom. And so you can just read more about it there. It's actually very interesting and more than I can actually cover in this lecture. So I'd like you to take a little bit of time and watch this brief video at Wright and participate in an application activity. So Watch the video of these two high school math prodigies who recently developed a new proof for the Pythagorean theorem. These are some Louisiana girls, so it makes me super proud. I'd like for you to apply the systems view of creativity first. And so, for example, if we go back up and just think about that systems view of creativity, so I'd like you to apply that one first after you watch it. How is person, how is domain, and how is field interacting? How are those three things interacting in this experience that these students recently had? Also, please consider some of the models and the theories that we studied in this lesson and the previous one, which are evident in this experience. So just off the top of my head, it is evident that these students were supported by an intriguing problem, which supports Sawyer's assertion that problem finding is an essential part of creative production. Wallace's assertion of incubation and illumination could also be part of their creative journey because they spent several months revising and working on their theorem. Sternberg's triangular model is also evident because the students were defying the odds by attempting to solve an elusive math problem. So here are just three of them that we immediately can see evident. See if you can find additional ones as well. So now let's talk about characteristics associated with creativity. And this is something that we will develop our understanding of more throughout the course. So the IPAR studies were longitudinal studies. I think they were the 30s through the 50s or the 40s through the 60s. These were longitudinal studies that were very complex. And they studied a variety of types of people. So mathematicians, architects, all sorts of different types of people. And essentially what these studies revealed concerning the characteristics associated with creativity were these particular characteristics were salient across all different types of people, all different types of domains. And these were just persistent characteristics that showed up. Intelligent, original, independent, open to experience. Remember, we talked about that last week, openness. Intuitive, holders of theoretical and aesthetic interests, possessed of a sense of destiny and purpose. And so these were what the IPAR studies revealed. Additional studies have been done that built on these findings, and not only do they consistently conclude that these characteristics are sound and valid, but they've also been able to build on that with some additional findings. So I definitely recommend that you read chapter 4, which is going to delve into each one of these. But essentially the findings are that creative people, they have messy minds. We talked about this from a neurobiological perspective, but the studies talk about how the processes, the way that people think, creative people think about things. Sometimes we're going to see that the messy minds that it talks about, it actually even translates into messy environments. I think about a picture of Einstein's desk. I remember I used to have it in my classroom because when I taught in high school, my desk was always a mess. I always had stuff all over the place, and every once in a while I would get everything together and I would put everything in their little piles and file it away like it was supposed to go. And of course, in the rat race of school, I would just kind of get caught up in the flow of what was going on. But I remember someone actually had got a picture of Einstein and it was his desk and it was just a mess. And they said, hey, if this is Einstein's desk, maybe there's hope for you as well. And of course, I'm definitely not comparing myself to Einstein in any way, but I guess one of the things I want to point out about it is, many times our gifted students, they are going to be absolutely brilliant, but they are not going to be able to keep up with their materials. Their backpacks are always a mess. They may not even know where they are sometimes. And so that's something that we want to think about is, yes, you're going to have this super organized, perfectionist, color coded type gifted, but then you also have this messy mind kind of gifted. And their creativity just manifests different ways. They engage in imaginative play. And this is definitely, we see this in children, but even in adults, we see creative individuals engaging in imaginative play. And this is through structured and unstructured activities. They have passion for their activities. They take time for solitude. And so we want to think about some of the research about neurobiology that said reflection was important. Well, that if we're thinking about solitude and what that does for someone, especially perhaps someone who tends to be a bit more introverted, they're intuitive and they work through insight. And so there are many times these are going to be the people that say, I can't exactly explain to you why I felt like this was the right answer or why I knew to do this. I felt like I just felt it. I felt like I should. They're open to experience. They're open to learning different ways, different methods for things from different types of people. They are very mindful. These are students who are often considered thoughtful of their peers. Sometimes that's the way it manifests. They're very sensitive. They can turn adversity into advantage. They think differently than other people, and they are not afraid to take risks. And so these are just some basic characteristics associated with creativity that have come from the research. Again, I advise you to read chapter 4. You can read more about the research that are behind these findings, but definitely keep this list in mind when you are working with your students, when you are working with your gifted students. Creativity is going to look different in different individuals. Next, I want to talk about multicultural nuances and differences when it comes to the lived experiences of creative people. So cross-cultural experiences are correlated to creativity when the person has dispositional plasticity. And this is an openness to new experiences and cultures and flexible thinking regarding race and culture. And so essentially what this is saying is that when people are open to new cultural experiences and when they have flexible thinking regarding race and culture, there is a high correlation to creativity when they are in a cross-cultural experience. So for example, if someone just goes overseas and let's say that they just stay on their army base the entire time and they eat at McDonald's, they're in this foreign country with foreign food and all these sorts of things, but they try to assimilate as many factors as they can to what they know. Those types of people are not going to have the same type of cross-cultural creativity as someone who goes open, wanting to learn about new cultures, interacting with people, even if they don't fully know the language. So just because someone has a cross-cultural experience, maybe they live overseas for a while or they travel a lot, or that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to have a high correlation to creativity. They have to have that concept of what's called dispositional plasticity. Research regarding the intersection of creativity and culture is a growing field. So read chapter 4 to learn more about the salient characteristics of creative individuals and how multicultural and demographic nuances can affect the way creators are supported in given contexts, but also about how those given contexts affect them. And so our last slide actually has to do with this part about how creators are supported in given contexts. So research shows that the domain aspect is an important distinction in how creativity is exercised by creative individuals. And I'm sorry, there's a correction here. It should say the field aspect. Let me correct that. Thank you. The field aspect. So I'm going to go back up just to remind you. The field, these are the gate, this could be the gatekeepers, so to speak, of the system. So let's go back down and, okay. So research shows that the field aspect is an important distinction in how creativity is exercised by creative individuals. Men and women have different experiences expressing their creativity despite similar ratings on discrete tests of creativity. And if you think about this, you can consider there are a lot of things that go into that. There are, societal roles. There are gender role expectations. There are lots of different things that go into this. Chapter 4 in your book discusses it a little bit more fully. I think it's very interesting. I think that many of our students, our young students today, probably are not going to have some of those barriers that some of this research is already outdated because we're just such a different society. New research is needed to see if this is still existing. Disciplinary specific expectations for creativity can determine how successful creators are in the field. So for example, math and science, perhaps those fields may have very specific expectations. And if a creator does not fit the traditional mold, or perhaps maybe has a non-traditional way of expressing that creativity, then the field itself may not be as open to what the creator has to bring or to say, which is pretty sad. But I mean, that's just what the research says. And an individual expressing creativity in a foreign cultural context could be well received if the product is highly valued or the creator's native context is highly valued. If not, then the inverse is often the experience. And so essentially, this is just saying that if the creator is from maybe a different cultural context than what they're presenting their creativity in, but whatever it is that they're presenting is really needed, like it's very innovative, it's highly creative. I'm thinking about the movie, for example, Hidden Figures. If you've not seen that movie, that's one of the ones I recommend for the movie project. The creator was a Black female, and she was part of a group of females mathematicians, and she was able to, they were able to make a profound difference in, I think it was the moon landing. I'm trying to remember, but anyway, I don't want to give it away. It's a spoiler if you haven't seen it, but they were creating at a time in which Black females were not part of, space missions and outer space research and technology. And so, but what she had to bring and what the group had to bring was so important that, they kind of bent the rules, so to speak. That's a great movie. If you haven't seen that one, of course, it's based on a true story, so check it out. And then creative, gifted, and talented has similar traits as ADHD. And if you look at the bottom of page 123, This one is so profound because you can see it lined up. The traits for creativity and ADHD are almost identical. And it's the reason that sometimes some of our gifted and talented students have, uh, they are dual exceptional. They have 504s for ADHD as well. And this doesn't mean that they don't have ADHD. It just means that, are we diagnosing ADHD, or are we perhaps misdiagnosing ADHD, because we don't have a diagnosis for creativity and what creativity looks like. So something to consider and keep in mind for your students. So let's talk about creativity across a lifetime. And these are just a few of the findings from the research. Play is essential, especially for children, to develop creativity. When we say children, I'm talking anyone within our school system, all the way up to our seniors. They need time for play. Adults need time for play. The research says that adults need time for play. So play is essential. The second thing is changes in the educational environment seem likely to affect the creativity. For example, there's a slump around age 5, right, when they start school, and around age 9 or 10. And these correlate to formal schooling and more intense standardized testing. Adolescent peaks, bumps, and slumps is what the research calls it, but it is also a time for enhanced risk taking. Of course, we have to consider how do our classrooms build in opportunities for our students to take risks in a way that is not, a disciplinary infraction, in a way that's channeled to something truly creative, academic, and productive. Creativity may peak in young adulthood, plateaus from 40 to 70, and decline thereafter. But it's important to note that those tests are limited. Creativity across a lifetime needs more research. We do have a lot in children, and we do have quite a lot in adolescents, but we need additional studies about what it looks like beyond mid-20s. So here are some closing thoughts. I have linked another video here, so please take time to watch it. It will be linked in the slide deck that's going to be on Moodle. And I want you to reflect on the characteristics that we talked about for creative individuals, and also the theories of creativity. Essentially, what we want is for your learning to help you meet the needs of your students. And we are simply refining our understanding of creativity, refining those theories, and we're refining the characteristics, so that as we move forward and we begin to think about how we can make modifications in the classroom, how we can look at lesson plans and assessment differently, we'll have a good foundation to make those decisions on. As you continue your personal creative pursuit, so see discussion board 2 for more details on that, consider your intrinsic motivation for the pursuit. That was something we spent a lot of time talking about this week. Pay attention to your creative process. When do new ideas and skill breakthroughs occur? Watch the TED Talk by Puccio and consider his assertion that creativity is a life skill. And with that in mind, I admonish you, I encourage you, enjoy the personal creative pursuit. Have fun, play. We know that play is essential. And carefully read chapters 3 through 4 and complete the assignments on Moodle. Here are our references for this week. And please reach out if you have any questions. I hope you enjoy this lesson and your reading this week and your assignments. Have a great week.